All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Kuali Research August Hot Topics webinar. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Andrea Martin, and I am a trainer and client support analyst here at UCSD in the Office of Contracts and Grants. If this is your first time attending one of our monthly Hot Topic webinars, we try to keep them around 30 minutes, and our goal with this webinar series is just to go over some of the common questions we're receiving from UCSD's Quality Research Help Desk. That way we can show you all some of the best practices and how to perform those tasks. And today we are going to be discussing outgoing subawards. And thank you so much to those who took the time to submit your questions. And today we have Sean Monroe, who is the UCSD project manager for the Outgoing Subawards module, joining us today. And he'll just be going through some of your questions. And if you have any questions as he's going through, please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. And all right, Sean, thank you for joining us today. I'll go ahead and unshare my screen. That way you can share yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I don't have a ton to share on my screen, I don't believe. But what I could do is I could pull up the 3 starting questions that we have already and kind of go through them. Actually, instead of you guys just staring at some words, I'll actually go ahead and pop into our staging environment of Quality, which is one of our test environments, so we could click around in, make some changes without impacting any of our production area, just so I can kind of click through and show some examples as I answer some of the questions. I'll also be monitoring the chat as well, and Andrea, so just go ahead and send anything if you have questions as we go through this. So the first question we had from today was about OCGA's ability, sorry, let me pause on my notifications, OCGA's ability to make edits to subaward, new subaward records as they are sent to them through the approval process that happens. And I think there's a few different things here that we could talk about today. There's some new processes that we're looking at. We have some requests out to Kuali right now for actual enhancements to the system that might make this work a little better. And I think there's also some best practices that the fund managers could do, or whoever's creating the subaward record could do as well to really help out here. So the question revolved around when you send it to OCGA, why aren't they able to edit it, and why does it completely shut down the record if they disapprove the record and it's not editable for anybody at that point, and you have to start over on a new subaward record. Understand that could be very painful. So first thing I want to do is show how you can save a copy before it ever goes to OCGA. So if I was in here, I'm going to go into Kuali. This again is our staging environment. Create a subaward. There's several different statuses that we have. Draft is actually acts different than any of the other statuses that are on here. Ready for negotiation, and every status after ready for negotiation, upon submission of that subaward record, goes to the OCGA ancillary research team for approval. So most people that we've seen that have run into this problem where they're not able to edit the record after are ones where they are starting the record, they build it all in one shot, and they submit it directly to OCGA ancillary research team in the ready for negotiation status. So what that does is that the first time they hit the submit button in the subaward actions, they're submitting it with that ready for negotiation status, and it goes directly through routing. We have this special status that we had created through the design sessions with the subject matter experts that we worked with for subawards called draft. Draft actually does not have any workflow routing behind it. So what that means is you're able to submit the first time you're putting together your subaward record, you're able to submit it as draft and send out a draft submission. That automatically will move to final. You'll see it won't say in route or anything else on the top. It'll actually say final in the draft form the first time you submit it. So what this does is Kuali has a subaward record, right? These are your standard subaward records. Every time a change is made to that record and it's resubmitted, it creates a new version of that record. Those versions in Kuali behind the scenes all work as different documents. So you'll see document IDs up on the top right corner, as well as the subaward IDs. So when you send over the document to OCGA and they disapprove it, it locks that document as disapproved. So what happens if you do this method of saving it as draft first, submitting it, it creates a finalized document, version number 1, that's there and it's saved and it's in the system, and that subaward record will not go away. Once you switch it over for ready for negotiation and you submit that, it'll create version number 2, which then, because we set it to that secondary status that has workflow routing built into it, goes to OCGA Ancillary Research Team for approval. If there's anything missing with that, it's really easy to miss funding sources. You add the award. There's that little add button that I know I've been guilty of missing quite a few times. It took me a while to get used to clicking add after I added the funding source. Things like that that are usually missing. When you send over that ready for negotiation version to the ancillary research team, it actually is version 2 that you're sending over to them. So if there's something missing like that, they're able to disapprove that record number 2, and you still have your original record to work from. So they could disapprove that record number 2 and they could put the reason for the disapproval, hey, the award is missing. You're able to go back into your original version 1 that's finalized, that you're still able to look up. You could just search for it. You could search, most likely you're going to be the requisitioner. You could search for your name under requisitioner and find all the subawards that are related to you in whatever status. You can pull it up many different ways, but you're going back into that draft version of it. You're able to do things like adjust and add the funding source that might have got missed, or whatever else it was that caused the ancillary research team to not be able to approve that record. And then you're able to do the same exact thing. Right, you take that, you add whatever was missing, you remediate any of the issues, you switch it back over to ready for negotiation again, and you submit it to them, and they will get that new version, and you don't have to restart from the beginning. Just kind of a little quirk of the system. If you do send it the first time, you submit, you have it in ready for negotiation, that just sends that original version 1 to the ancillary research team for approval. And if everything's not perfect, you have to, they have to disapprove it, and it makes you have to restart everything because you don't have that safe draft version. So number 1 best practice for today, always whenever you're creating a subaward record in Kuali, you want to first set it the status as draft and go to subaward actions. When you have all of your details in here, it's not going to actually let me go over there because there's a bunch of missing information. But if I had all that in, I'd be able to go and submit it, and you have that draft version 1 record that you could always go back to make edits as you progress through the workflow. There's also some additional pieces of information I'd like to share. This is a little opening up behind the curtains, if you would. We are working with Kuali for a little better functionality we would like to see in Kuali here. We're waiting to hear back from them. We've sent out these requests. Their resource that we work closely with and partner with has that. She's working with their project team to actually understand what it'll look like to get that in the system and give us some timelines and everything like that. So we're still in really early stages of this, but we would like better functionality instead of just approve something like add what's wrong and send it back for adjustments to the fund managers or the requisitioner, whoever is building out this subaward record. So we're really looking at that functionality. It's very early in those stages. We haven't heard back from Kuali. We should have an answer for them in the next couple of days. We've also met working with the ancillary research team to find out workarounds right now as well. So we have realized that not everybody is doing that first version of submitting a record as draft and creating that version 1. They're just submitting them as ready for negotiation as version 1. So we're looking at some potential workarounds as well. Things like ancillary research team could approve it and then send it back to the user as draft. But we don't want to make any of those leaps and jumps until we really have a clear idea of what's going to happen on the Kuali side. So there could potentially be some changes kind of to how that workflow is looking in the very near future. As soon as we have a little bit clearer of an idea, especially from the Kuali side, which is really what we're waiting on at this point, we'll send out additional notification and communication to everybody that has Subword records. I see we have a few different questions in the chat. I'm just gonna go ahead and go through those now. I don't wanna switch to any other topics before we jump back into those. So I see there is the first question: when you make corrections, do you need to submit as a draft again, version 1? No, you do not. So once it's in, for the most part, you never wanna revert back to previous statuses. So once it's, sorry, I think I misread that question. Let me start again there as I thought through it. When you make corrections, do you need to submit a draft version again, version 1? It actually won't be version 1 when you make the corrections, but yes, I would say when you are making adjustments to the draft, so say you sent out version 2, which was the ready for negotiation after you had already saved the draft. They disapprove that because you missed the award. You come back to your draft version, you would again add the funding source, and yes, you want to as draft submit that as well, because that's going to save version 3 at that point. But that version 3 will be your saved draft version that will have your award added to it. So you're basically replacing your finalized saved version 1, which didn't have the award, with this new version 3 that does have the award. Version 2 in the middle there is just that version of ready for negotiation that was disapproved. Let me go to the next one. I received a message in Kuali. Are invoices now being managed in Kuali? That's one of the next questions, so I will get to that one very shortly and answer that in the overall thing. If you still have any questions after I get through the next section, definitely shoot them back through the chat. Let me see. After the final draft, do you change the status to ready for negotiation? Yeah, so every time you're ready to resend it, so like you did for version 3, you made those adjustments, you saved that as draft. Every time you're ready to resend it to the contracts and grants ancillary research team, you're going to switch it back over to ready for negotiation and submit it. Once you switch it over to ready for negotiation and submit it, that automatically the workflow picks back up and sends it to them. So that's the only difference between draft and all of the other ones. All of the other statuses will actually go to the ancillary research team for approval of each version. Draft does not do that. So the draft version, when you're putting this all together, you're gonna save it as that and then send it over. And it's important to only do that with new subawards too. So this is where I started touching on earlier, and I came back because I had misread the question, but I think it is relevant here. So if you have a record that's active, you've had changes, you've had things go against it, all the contract has been negotiated, it was already set up in the beginning, you had kind of activity there, if you would. You don't want to switch it back to draft. You want to always leave those as active. So you would go in, you would make an edit, and you would send that over to the ancillary research team, and they would approve or disapprove. You're always going to have your last active is kind of takes over what the draft was in the beginning, right? The last active was your starting point, your total approved record. So you don't want to set them back to draft. You don't usually ever want to go back statuses. It's always forward with the statuses. Okay, I think that's most of the questions around this portion of the initial submission of invoices. Sorry, not invoices, I'm jumping ahead to my next question. The initial submission of Subword records and how that kind of process works. I think the one best practice is just to submit as draft first, and we're looking for better options on how we can handle them if that somehow doesn't happen. But it is best practice for anybody submitting them to do the first one as draft. So invoices, I know I've seen a few questions about invoices in the chat. That is my next question. So thank you everybody for queuing me up as well there. So what I had from the original question that was sent in is, what is the invoice payment process? Subs still send invoices to disbursement, and then the AP team uploads them to KR for department approval, question mark. Is it then ready for payment and OFC is not involved, question mark. So I think it's probably best if I start from the beginning here with the invoices, because I know there's been a lot of questions, and the different teams have been getting questions, so it'll be good to address this one. So invoices, for the most part, are gonna work pretty much the same as they did in Marketplace, on kind of how it works for the subrecipients involved in it. They could still send their invoices through Payment Compass. There is those other methods of getting it to the invoice team. I think there's a fax number that some still go to, in paper mail. All of those will still get into Kuali as an invoice. So whenever anything is sent through any of those traditional methods, it will still end up in Kuali. It's a little different behind the scenes. The invoice team is still taking care of those. What they did before is, when they got these invoices, they were manually inputting them into Marketplace. All that team has done is really switch from manually putting them into Marketplace to now uploading them to KR. And they've kind of been removed from the loop of any error handling with invoices that come in. Their new job is really just the vehicle to get those invoices that come into them into Kuali, so the requisitioner can pick it up from there. So each record, and I'm going to remind everybody at the end too to update requisitioners. This is an important piece. But every invoice that is entered into Kuali, no matter who enters it in Kuali, stops with the requisitioner of that subaward record for finalization and approval. So it's really usually going to be the fund manager there. Departments can adjust that if they want someone else to be in that position. But the requisitioner on each of these records will be the final say. So they'll have that final, okay, this is ready for payment portion of it. I like to say finalization. It technically is called approval, but I like finalization because that's a little bit more closer to what it is. Because we know there's also approvals on some of these that need to happen. That's also why it stops at the requisitioner. So if it needs the PI approval at that stop, the requisitioner is able to look at it, say, oh, this one doesn't have PI approval. Let me go get that. Let me make sure that's part of this sub-award invoice record that gets into the system. So that's really kind of the reason behind the stop with the requisitioner. So any of those previous invoice intake methods work. Whenever they're sent through one of those methods, it will end up in Kuali. Whenever it ends up in Kuali, it's put into Kuali, it goes to the requisitioner. When I say goes to the requisitioner, it actually lives in Kuali and it shows as an en route invoice. The requisitioner will see that in their, if you look at your action list, you'll see it in your action list that there's invoices needed approval. And it will also email you. So you'll get an email if you're the requisitioner saying, hey, there is an invoice entered into Kuali. It's waiting for your finalization and approval. That's when the requisitioner would look at it, make sure everything's there. If everything's good to go, they click approve. Before I go through the next step of what happens when you approve it, I wanted to also add that there's one new option with Kuali that wasn't available in Marketplace for entering invoices against subawards. And that's the ability for a requisitioner, and this isn't tied to just the requisitioner, it's anybody with a research administration role within Kuali is actually able to add an invoice themselves. So if these are, I heard there's a lot of cases where the invoices usually go directly to the fund manager a lot of times, or the requisitioner, whoever it is that get these invoices, and they forward it over to the IPPS disbursements team. The invoice team picks it up and puts it into, would pick it up and put it in Kuali in our new process. If you don't want to wait for them to put it into Kuali, the fund managers or anybody in a research administration role in Kuali all the fund managers will usually have this, they're able to go in and enter an invoice themselves. So really you're cutting out the invoice team. You're able to enter that invoice, and that way it still goes to the requisitioner for approval. So even if you're the requisitioner, you're entering the invoice, it's still going to have that systematic stop at you. But really, it kind of saves you from having to go back and wait for it to get put into the system. You're able to put it in yourself. And if you know everything's good to go with that one, you already looked at it before you even put it into the system, you're able to just approve it right away. And it goes on to the next step, which I'd like to kind of just give some of that piece as well. So once you approve it in Kuali, we built integrations with Oracle. So once an invoice is approved in Kuali, it automatically, the integration picks that up and it automatically sends all the accounting information over to Oracle. So really what we're saying here is once it's finalized in Kuali, the accounting piece is all going to happen for you. In Oracle, how it works, it stops first at the AP, Oracle AP. So payment actually goes out. Once the payment actually goes out and that accounting is finalized for the payment, it sends the cost over to the project and task that's associated with that subaward record. So we take care of all of that on the Oracle side in an automated fashion. If you guys want to look at those and watch it and make sure it's happening how you would expect, I definitely recommend that, going in there and looking. But it'll really create that, and all of that happens automatically once it is finalized. So we really removed a lot of the manual pieces of people having to then go do the accounting, and it picks it up. We have the integration watches for any finalized invoice. Once that finalized invoice comes through, it will automatically pay that out from Oracle, and it will automatically transfer those costs to the project and task that is listed. It'll be right here in the account ID field. So that's kind of an overview of invoicing, how it works. The best way to think about the new invoicing practices is from the front end, from the subrecipient view, it's going to mostly be the same. They could send it in to however they've been sending it in before. On the back end, if it ends up with the IPPS invoicing team, they're just uploading that directly to KR. And it stops with the requisitioner that's listed on that subaward record. The one new piece is anybody that has a research administration role can enter an invoice directly into Kuali. Again, no matter who enters it, it's still going to stop at the requisitioner for that finalization. And basically at that point, it's really the approval and finalization to say this is ready to be paid. Because once you finalize that invoice in Kuali, everything's going to happen automatically on the Oracle side. It's going to pay that out, and it's going to put those charges to where it needs to go. Part of paying it out and putting those charges where it needs to go, it also reduces the commitment because the commitments are really going to follow the Oracle available amount. I think I have a few questions, so let me kind of, there's a few on the chat. Let me go back and kind of read through these and answer them as I go. So the first question, does subaward record have to get modified to update the requisitioner? Yes, so you can edit this. Again, anybody who's a research administrator can make these adjustments to the record. You would go in, you just click edit right here on the bottom. It will give you the ability to remove whoever the requisitioner is, search for the new requisitioner that should be in the record, put that name in there, and then you're just gonna submit that. You wanna make sure you call out what you changed in this description. Before I jump over to the submit page, let me just show that. Right here in the Subword description, as you guys have all seen in training, this part's gonna be really important. So if you do update the requisitioner, you wanna come here to the description, put updated new requisitioner, then jump over to Subword actions, submit that. If it's active, you're going to leave it as active. Again, like I kind of went over earlier, but you would just submit that new version. That would become version 2, right? Would go over to the ancillary research team. What the ancillary research team then is going to look at that. They're going to say, oh, they just updated the requisitioner. Perfect. This should be an easy one for them, right? They don't have to go do more negotiations or more contract here. It's not a financial change. They're just going to double check that nothing else changed. Just in case, to be safe, they're going to make sure it really matches what the description change was. Once that's all good, they'll approve it. The next time you search for the finalized version of that subaward ID, most likely you're going to come up with a new finalized version. So in that case, it would be version 2. It would have your new requisitioner, and you'd be good to go. Any invoices put in after that point when the second version is approved, any new invoices that are put in will go to that new requisitioner for approval. Let me keep going down. Can you show us how to enter an invoice? So on the financial tab, there is at the very bottom of it, you'll see add invoice. I always just double check that I'm in the staging environment, but I'll actually click into that so we could see how it looks. Again, this is not production, so this is not gonna change anything that we have in the actual live environment. We would put the subaward ID as best practice right here. I did not look up, and I don't know the PI name on here, but usually you would put the PI name, last name, as we learned in training and went through in the best practices. You would put just subaward ID, PI, last name. Again, what this is going to do, this is very much like when you make edits to the subaward record. This description box, when it comes to your action list or where it wants you to approve, this is just going to be a quick reference. So it shows you, oh, I know exactly what this is, right? I have a new invoice. It's for subaward record 7003, and then it's for PI Jones or PI, whoever the PI is. So you're pretty familiar with what that invoice is most likely going to be. Invoice ID, best practice is to use the invoice ID that is on the invoice that is sent. We've set this up as a best practice just so it really stores by that invoice ID in the record, which I'll go back and show really quick once we're through with this invoice. And then you're able to quickly reference it. So if you use the invoice ID from the subrecipient, and they call in and they say, hey, I sent you invoice 161 in this example, you're able to say, oh, here's their invoice 161 that they sent me. I have it here in Kuali because I'm just looking at that subrecipient record where I could see all the invoices. I see it's still en route, right? I still haven't approved it because of something. Oh, here's the response, right? You're really able to kind of quickly see which invoice they're asking about. Start date and end date is for the period of performance of that invoice. So a lot of times they'll come in, right? A monthly invoice is very common. So, you know, you would probably set it, I'm going to do a little bit of a future invoice here. So you would set it the start date and the end date of that period that is being invoiced for. Sometimes this could be multiple months, sometimes they could have different periods, but all the invoices I've seen have the periods listed on them. Amount released, of course, is just going to be the invoice amount. Let's say this one was only for $1 that we charged in August. Effective date is going to be the invoice date. So let's say they just sent this to us yesterday. They just put that together, 8/4. You have attachments. This is where you would add whatever the invoice actual image is if they send it over in PDF. So you could upload those attachments. And then really once you have that base information, and that's really all that's needed, you could submit. You could also add additional attachments and notes if you so wanted to. Some people have started using this to add additional backup if they need additional approval and other kind of information that goes with it. I've seen some people add all of that as a bigger package to attachment. I think it's really the preference of whoever's managing that sub-award record. And then once you submit, it would finalize this invoice. And again, every time you hit submit on a new invoice, it's going to go to the requisitioner for approval. So the en route, I see a question, does the en route status mean it's with disbursements? Nope, the en route status means it's with the requisitioner for approval. So whenever you see invoice that's en route, it means that it went to whoever's listed as the requisitioner on that subaward record, which will be one of my next points. Make sure you update those requisitioners on all of these records so it's the correct person. I think we went through a lot of these. Historical invoices, no, not all individually. They are in Kuali as an aggregated amount moved over from Marketplace as legacy data. So in this example is a good one. You'll see aggregated legacy data. you'll see the total number of invoices that were in the legacy system. So in this case, this moved over from Marketplace, and it had a total of $3,674.62 of invoices in Marketplace. So if you want to make sure the invoice has been paid and see the check number, if you want to see the check number, you would have to go over into Oracle AP to actually look that up. All the Kuali invoices, it's going to be KRS dot the invoice number that was put into Kuali dot the Subword ID. So if you are searching in Kuali payables, you could look it up by the Subword ID and find all the invoices that are related to that Subword record, and you're able to look up check information on that. So the fund manager needs to be requisitioner. So anybody, it doesn't necessarily have to be the fund manager, but it's whoever needs that final say of the invoice that it's ready to be paid. You want to make sure is in the requisitioner field. Is there a way to see the invoice from the approval email? I don't think so. You really have to come in here and into Kuali and look at it. Same thing for approvals. If you are going to approve it, you have to approve it in Kuali. Cool. I think we got through a lot of those. The two things I want to add really quickly before we lose everybody is definitely go look for Requisitioner. I wanted to just plug one other piece of closed invoices. So we moved over everything into Kuali. We did move over things as closed and things as active records. If it had a period of performance end date that was no more than a year in the past, we moved it over as active. But that means that there were ones with end dates in the past year that were moved over as active that probably aren't actually active. So when you're looking at all the subawards to update the requisitioner, also look at them. There's going to be some that are in that active status that are probably no longer active. So you can move those to closed. Before you move those to closed, just make sure all the actions that are going to be taken against that subaward are done is the other important piece. Make sure all the invoices have been processed against it and everything is complete. And you can move those over to closed as well. When you move it over to closed, it's going to reduce the commitments that might be in Oracle against that project and task. So if there is any available amount, there's going to be a commitment in Oracle for that available amount. When you move them to close, it removes that commitment. So a good kind of best practice to go look at all of those active awards in your area as well, and move over any to close that are no longer active, and you don't expect any extensions or any other activity coming on those. Other than that, those were the ones I wanted to get through today. There is was a question about paying via wire. There is a process that is just about done for that. Really, it'll be a way to create an invoice where it doesn't do the automatic function in Oracle, and you put in the raw wire request through Snow, but it still represents the invoice in Kuali. Whew, I'm out of breath. I tried to run through all those last pieces really quick. I didn't realize how quick we burned through that 30 minutes. But thank you all for attending. I'll turn it back over to Andrea.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, again, for coming on today. This was all super helpful and super informative. And if any of you have questions that we weren't able to get to, or if you have questions come up as you are creating a subaward, let me share my screen here. If you go onto Blink and search for Kuali Research, this is the first page that comes up. And if you go into the lower right-hand corner of the screen, this has our help desk information where you can email us or submit a ticket to us, and we'll try to answer your questions as quickly as we can. But again, thank you so much, Sean, and thanks everyone for coming on today to go over outgoing subawards. All right, thanks everybody.